Hey Gators, this is the last part of the interviews lectures to conquer. So again, I hope, just to reiterate, sometimes it helps to just kind of listen to the lectures, and I don't care if you fold your laundry during it, that's perfectly fine. I'll never know. So some people need to keep their hands busy or kind of be doing something else while they're listening, and that's fine. You can be taking a walk, working out, doing something else. But again, when the lecture is concluded, I ask that you maybe jot down some notes and some thoughts. Definitely review the slides so that you can keep track of the information we talked about. There are definite takeaways that are going to be specific to you and your own journey and your own process. So keep an open effort on that. And we will start into ways to approach panel interviews. So panel interviews are common. They're time savers. Okay, so let's back up just a little bit. You will often see a panel interview in organizations like law enforcement, government, nonprofit. They have a couple of purposes to them. Number one, it lets everyone see the candidate all at the same time and kind of have a chance for everyone to weigh in. Okay, so if we can schedule everyone at once, we're kind of duplicating efforts. Okay. It also lets them have a diversity of opinion on the same experience. So you get lots of points of view in one room. It also lets the team see dynamics develop because of the people in the room at the time, and they can see how you interact with different people. Okay, so keep in mind, it's a matter of time before some point in your career that you're going to be in front of a panel interview. So you want to get good at them. And you can practice them with peers and coworkers. It's not a bad idea to do that. But let's jump in. So again, panel interviews are often used in the later stages because a hiring committee can commit an hour or so to a candidate and evaluate the same material on a level playing field rather than piece together what is said during a candidate's fragmented one-on-one interviews over an entire day or two with several people. So again, it's kind of a much more cohesive way to do everything at once. But on the candidate's perspective, it's awful, right? Some candidates dread panel interviews, but if you're prepared and you have a positive awareness of a hiring committee's intentions, then you're going to be able to embrace the challenges that panel interviews present, and it's not going to be so bad. So this is to help strengthen you during something that feels like a firing squad. Okay? So as a candidate, you really need to perform at your best in the short time that you have under a committee's Klieg light. Okay? So you're kind of in a spotlight where everyone's looking at you, you feel high pressure because you're kind of outnumbered in the room. But here are a few tips to help you be at your best. So first, identify the target. No, the target is not your interviewing skills. You'd be surprised. Some people think that all panel interviews do is put you on the hot seat and put pressure on you. No, actually they're not. They're more about these other things I mentioned earlier in the lecture. Panel interviews are often called firing squads, especially when the seating of the interviewers and the interviewee is arranged like a carnival shooting gallery. Pew, 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 right? I mean, it feels that way just because of the physical arrangement of the room. The purpose of panels is not to determine who can handle pressure per se. Now, there are some that actually do that a little bit, and sometimes they're in these kind of high stress jobs. Maybe you might see it in law enforcement or something like that. But rather, most of the time a panel interview is really looking at who is the candidate that's the solution to the committee's problem. The problem they have is they have this vacancy, or they need someone that's going to be able to do this. They need someone who best fits their vacancy. Instead of being in the crosshairs of the firing squad and feeling picked on, be the carnival worker who puts the ducks in a row and presents the targets. So be a part of the solution, okay? The ducks are the items on your resume, right? Assemble them in a way that they can see fit. A compelling story, maybe about your experiences in another employer organization, or examples that demonstrate why you're the best fit for the job. When you become less defensive, you'll actually join the panel's attempt to hit the target. It's not going to feel so aimed at you. So this is kind of your own maybe mental strategy to get over the nervousness of the firing squad experience. Do some of your own reconnaissance, okay? It actually really pays off. So when you're invited for a panel interview, ask who will be participating. It's a very reasonable request. It's usually a human resources representative, a supervisor, people who will work closely with the position, and maybe someone from a cross-functional area that you'll intercept from time to time. And that's kind of a person that brings some diversity in thinking to the panel. You'll want to search LinkedIn or maybe the organization's online directory to try to find each panelist's name and responsibilities and really familiarize yourself with that person and the panel. The panel will ask many questions. What will you do for my department? How would you handle this, right? Don't make it about you, make it about you benefiting them. And so if you get to know them and think about the kinds of things that cross their radar from time to time, you can kind of steer your answers a little bit better. Another suggestion is ease the tension. So sometimes you just need to take those physical moments for yourself. Arrive in the room a few minutes early. Take advantage of greeting each panelist as he or she enters the room. It's kind of some small talk, right, to relax and use as a segue once the interview starts. So maybe everyone's talking about their beverages they brought in the room or something they just finished or something they saw on TV last night. I don't know. If the panel's already assembled once you go in, you don't really have the chance to do that. Still greet each panelist, but only if the group is relatively small. If there's 20 people in there, now that would be kind of silly, but if there are 20 people in there, that's a little much to sit there and shake everyone's hands. And a dozen is kind of the limit, right? To me, it's probably closer to 10. If there's more than 10 people, it'll seem forced to shake everyone's hand, not to mention time consuming. You can have a broad brushstroke approach and say, hi, I'd like to shake everyone's hands, or formally introduce myself to everyone. My name is so-and-so, but at the expense of trying to use your time wisely and get started quickly, I will just kind of introduce myself to the entire group. It's nice to be here. That's a very cordial way to introduce yourself to a large group. And frankly, some people don't like shaking hands, especially if we're in a pandemic, right? So they're kind of like fist bumping or elbow bumping or whatever. And so you can kind of use that as an excuse too. What's in a name? So this one's an easy one. This is kind of you mapping out the room. So create a note sheet for each panelist with his or her potential pain points, the questions to ask, a story about your background, or skills that maybe relates to his or her functional area. So kind of some quick notes to kind of remind you of some things to mention. But when you sit down, arrange or diagram the names in front of you on your note sheet in the position where the panelists are seated in the room on your sheet. Okay? The spatial relations will help you respond quicker and recall the panelists' names more readily. So this is actually a trick I learned from the U.S. Senate. So I took students on a tour in Washington, D.C. It was basically a career expedition. And we met in Senate offices with staffers, Senate staffers. And as soon as every student entered the room and sat at the table, that staffer diagrammed the entire room and got everyone's name and actually drew out a diagram of everyone in the room at that time. I was very impressed with that staffer. They kept very detailed notes of everyone that was there because as a senator staffer, you have to know names and faces. It's all about connections and relationships. And if you forgot someone that you met with, there can be huge consequences for that. So they are trained to diagram the room whenever their constituents meet with them. Or if ever a student in the future says, hey, remember when we met? Do you think you guys have any internship positions? They're going to have to go back to their notes and remember when that was. So this is a really good one to do. And it only takes a few moments to do. A good panel will have little pop-up cards in front of them, or if on a video call, you can kind of see their names at the bottom of the screen if their videos are categorized or they have their name presentation. So there are shortcuts to this that definitely help in virtual interviews, but if you're in a live interview, you might have to draw it out. And remembering people's names is super impressive to potential employers. Vary your eye contact. Do not focus your attention on the panelist who asked a question, which seems kind of weird. You can begin each response by making eye contact with the person who asked the question, but then make a conscious effort to engage other panelists and start to address the entire room. Everyone's listening to you, everyone's there. Then finish where you started to assert yourself and confirm to the question asker that your answer satisfied the panelists who actually asked. So you kind of start with them, talk to the entire room, and end with them. Also, do not hand out resumes and portfolios to panelists unless they are requested. It's a little weird to be given this pile of paperwork until after the interview, because they're going to sit and fidget and flip through papers, and it'll distract the panelists and prevent eye contact. And they may lose track of what you're saying or the question asked, and it's not going to lead to a thorough, detailed interview. So again, you can tell them, I have these pieces of information. Would you like them now or would you like them after the interview? You can ask that question. But again, I'd kind of recommend that people don't offer them, because it's just noisy, distracting, again, unless they are requested. 2 more approaches. Avoid canned answers. Panelists will often read a scripted question that they ask all candidates. It really keeps the process fair and gives them a point of reference to compare you to others. Though the questions are standardized, you shouldn't respond as if you're trying to give the correct answer on a standardized test, right? You don't want to seem textbook. Keep your tone very conversational. Tell a story. Be prepared to provide examples of your technical and your interpersonal skills that maybe reveal more about your answer. So again, people like a good story. Don't get long-winded about it. Be concise and make sure the story has a point. It's easy to be nervous and lose track of what you're doing and suddenly realize you never answered the question. You can always you can end your response with, did I answer your question? Or I just want to make sure I answered your question. That's considered being thorough, and that's fine. But again, you have to be really careful not to get off track. Our final approach to panel interviews is to tie it all together. So this is kind of toward the end of the firing squad experience. Keep your message consistent. Find opportunities to circle back to a response that you made to one panelist's question or another while you're answering someone else's. So for example, this lets you reiterate and emphasize, right? If the human resources manager asks you a question about cultural fit, you can refer to your social skills that maybe you demonstrated on a project or experience that you mentioned in response to maybe a more tactical-based question asked by another person on the panel. So again, it reinforces the strengths you are bringing. This will keep each panelist engaged through the interview, even when you're not answering the question, because it lets them remember something you already shared. And again, it's about emphasis. So if you find a common theme to your story and you tell it consistently, it will also avoid the perception that you're just pandering to each panelist and kind of being a brown noser and trying to be likable, right? You're treating everyone equally, you're being respectful, and you're being consistent. Because we don't like hiring people that are unpredictable. None of this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde hiring. Well, you were this way in the interview, but once we brought you on board, we saw a totally different person. And we made a mistake in hiring you because you presented yourself differently. So again, consistency matters. This will wrap up our interviews portion. Hopefully these lectures came across as useful, interesting, and part of your preparation portfolio as you get out on the market. If you have any other questions, please let me know. There's so much to this process. And again, things change. So feel free to reach out to me if you have questions or comments. Thanks again.